welcome everyone to this very special event tonight. And I'm giving a signal so that those who are coming online can do so too. I think I hear from the microphone that everyone's tuned in, and we've got our outside audience as well as our inside one. Welcome everyone, and my name's Helena Kennedy. I'm a lawyer. I'm a King's Counsel, and I've practiced at the English Bar for more years than I'm prepared to count or admit to. But I want to just explain to you why a lawyer would be here taking part in this issue of homelessness and the challenge in creating proper housing in our present times. And I think it's one of the big issues, and should be one of the big issues, as we move towards what is clearly going to be an election before very long. You'll have seen it in your invitation, I hope, but the backstory is a bad one. We're one of the least affordable housing markets in the world. We've got the highest rate of homelessness in the whole of Europe. The urgency of our situation is really great, but it's going to require some significant leadership in order to move things forward. But we have in this room a considerable amount of expertise, not just up on this platform to my right and left, but all of you. And the reason I'm here is because I know this situation only too well. I'm a human rights lawyer. I think that the right to have a roof over your head and housing at a place that you can call home is absolutely vital as a human right. It's fundamental. And so it matters greatly to me, as I'm sure it does to all of you, or you wouldn't be here. But I was invited to come along by my great friend, John McAslan. And John McAslan is a force of nature, as many of you will know. He's not just a great architect. He is a man who always has ambitious ideas. I've seen some of the incredible work that he's done in different parts of the world, often in crisis, like Haiti. And I've also known how much he cares about this issue of providing real homes for people, and at the moment that not taking place. And so I love John McAslan, and if John McAslan asks you to do something, it's very difficult to say no. So I'm going to hand over to John so that he can then introduce his collaborators who are on this stage with him, all of whom have their own area of expertise, and they will be joining in this conversation. But I want to say to all of you, this is not just a conversation for those on the platform. It's a conversation in which we want all of you to participate as well. And so really, you know, you have a great deal of, you'll have answers to some of the challenges that will come up. So we want you contributing, and it's not just a sort of lineup of speakers. And I say to all of those who are online that please get your questions in. Lucy, who is our interlocutor, will read your questions out, and so that you too can participate in tonight's event. So John, over to you. Vision, please.
Right, thank you very much. Well, you've taken, the whole first page is now gone, Helena, so I can move to page 2. No, that's very kind, right, page 2. I think what I'm going to do is ask each of the experts to say a little bit about who they are and what they're going to be talking about, rather than me doing that. Okay. Olivia.
So I'm Olivia Harris. I'm Chief Executive at Dolphin Living. Dolphin Living are an affordable housing charity providing homes at below market rent to critical workers in inner London.
Rosalind.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Rosalind Raine. I'm Professor of Applied Health Research at UCL and a public health medicine doctor. I've worked in inequalities and inequity all my career, and I'm going to be focusing on the health and social impacts.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Fraser. I'm a professor at the Bartlett School of Architecture at University College London, and my part in the report is mainly the architectural side, so I will be presenting, in effect, what we're proposing through our report.
And thank you very much, Murray. And of course, Helena, thank you very much. I'm going to be talking a bit about one thing, actually, in particular, which is the possibility of an exciting initiative of a housing expo in 2026, which will focus on social and affordable housing, but that will be later. I also just wanted to say that we're going to wrap up proceedings probably just before 8, so we have to have a hard stop then. So we're going to talk for about 5 minutes each, then Helena will lead the conversation and we'll go to the Q&A. Thank you very much. Rosalind.
Thank you. And this work. So, good evening, everyone. Addressing the UK housing crisis affords us the rarest of opportunities, that of tackling the holy grail of improving everyone's lives, with benefits accruing the fastest for the most vulnerable. The report that we've launched today, and I hope that you've all seen it, and please pass it around to anybody you know who with expertise in this area, because we want everybody to be involved. It summarises how this vision is attainable. We lay out the evidence on the health and wider social impacts, the economic costs and savings, and we highlight exemplars of social and affordable housing which can feasibly be scaled nationally. The housing crisis impacts on individuals, families and communities, directly and indirectly. Here are some headlines from the literature review led by Kerry Littleford here on homeless people. They have 6 times the mortality rate and are about 15 times more likely to die from accidents and self-harm compared with those in stable housing. Those aged 50 to 60 years old are more likely to exhibit symptoms associated with very old age, including frailty and cognitive impairment. Their poor mental health, higher rates of infectious diseases, poor reproductive and oral health can all be improved through stable housing. What about our children? Around 120,000 of the approximately 300,000 homeless people in the UK are children. They suffer from exacerbations of acute and chronic respiratory conditions, mental ill health, infections. They're impacted directly or indirectly by violence. They have poor nutrition, partly secondary to unsatisfactory cooking facilities. And this is all compounded by inadequate and unfair access to health and dental services. And let's remember the spiral that homelessness creates. For example, adverse childhood experiences are a risk factor for homelessness, whilst being homeless increases risk of such experiences. And these adverse experiences are associated with suicidality, major depression, substance misuse, and also with poor academic achievement, leading to lower employment, which in turn raises the likelihood of homelessness. So homelessness casts a mighty shadow on our children, on their life chances, on future opportunities to contribute in the workplace and the community. Homelessness adds downward pressure on our economy at a time when I don't need to tell anyone that it's least needed, but it's avoidable. Professor Pizzo and Vani Kirapanandan, who are both here as well, calculate the costs of homelessness to be at least 6.5 billion annually, and the net savings through provision of social and affordable housing of about 1.5 billion per year through the mechanisms shown on this slide. These figures come from government and other published data, but we believe that they're underestimates. And this is because of the difficulties of calculating both the number of people in need and the beneficial impacts on economic growth, on productivity in the construction industry, its supply lines and elsewhere, on savings to unemployment and disability benefit, via savings to local authorities' homeless services, the NHS and care systems, and the criminal justice system, and due to the enhanced educational attainment and life chances. So in sum, stable housing improves lives, saves money, enhances communities and well-being, and drives growth. We know there are obstacles, but they are not insurmountable. There's no reason not to act now. Thank you.
Rosalind, thank you. And in describing that, I mean, you show that actually it makes economic sense, and yet somehow it proves a really challenging thing for governments to do. I wanted to ask you, Olivia, to just talk a bit about you're the person here that's really closest to the ground on this. You're dealing with this every day, and you're dealing with key workers. Perhaps you'll talk a little bit about your work and what you've learned through doing it daily.
Yeah, so, I mean, everyone knows there's a housing crisis. It's widely published. But what does it mean in reality for those who do not own their own home or cannot access social housing? So as well as considering the impact of the lack of social housing on those in greatest housing need, we should also be aware of the reality of the housing crisis for the average worker. It's these workers on modest incomes that have been priced out of the housing market. Historically, with social housing in greater supply, critical workers would have been able to register in many locations, including London, and are instead relying on the private sector. So this graph relates to London, and as it illustrates, the cost of housing in London has increased faster than wages, and that's both housing to buy, which is 200%, and housing to rent. And whilst the situation across the UK is not as extreme, with only 178% house price growth since 2005, when you compare this to wage growth of 153% and the slightly better figure of rental growth of 138%, we can understand that there's a crisis. And when we combine this with the impact of the cost of living on households, and this has been reported by Joseph Rowntree using their minimum income standard to be between 17 and 27%, depending on the household type, with single people being those most impacted. And we then again combine this with the cost of private landlords hoping to pass on the increased cost of borrowing and costs of running their properties, and this squeeze is likely to spread around the UK. So I think showing this sale and rental price growth set against much more modest increases in median earnings reminds us how dislocated the housing market has become from earnings across the UK. A lifetime of renting into pensionable age is likely to be the reality for many. And I'd like to just share with you two real-life stories of people that I've come across in my work over the past few months. So these are all anonymised, obviously. Nat and her 2 children had to leave their rental home when her relationship broke down. In the short term, she was able to stay with friends and benefit from cheap rent, whilst friends and friends of friends relocated abroad. However, having moved multiple times in the last 5 years, this source of housing has run out, and Nat has had to seek housing on the open market. She secured somewhere to live for £1,800 a month, the maximum she could afford. However, having moved in, it became clear that there were serious issues with the property, including damp and mould and pervading smell of cigarettes seeping in from neighbouring properties. The landlord refused to take action, and having given in her notice, and so having voluntarily made herself homeless, Nat cannot register for social housing or receive housing help from the local authority, and she and her children are again sofa surfing. Nat has recently registered with Homes for Westminster and hopes to access a Dolphin home. Alex and Kaz are fortunate and they live in a Dolphin flat, and I met them in their home last week. Alex is an early years specialist and has lived in Westminster her whole life, with her parents still living in the north of the borough and her siblings living nearby. Kaz was in the army and didn't find it easy to settle back into their hometown after leaving the army, so they moved to London and work in health and safety, so both critical workers. Initially, Kaz moved into Alex's studio flat, which was quite cramped. Last year, they moved into a one-bedroom Dolphin home with a space for a desk in the hallway for Kaz to work. Their rent is just under £1,400 a month. One-bedroom flats in Westminster on the open market start from £1,700 a month, and the reality is it would probably cost them more than £2,000 a month, so a really significant saving for them. Despite this being a rental property, they see it as a long-term home, and their 3-year tenancy will be renewed if they're good tenants and qualify in terms of income when their renewal comes up. Compared to friends and family in less stable or suitable housing, they feel fortunate. And in their words, they think Dolphin has taken the stress out of housing and provided them with a sanctuary.
Olivia, great. Thank you. What are you? Is Murray going to click?
I'll click. Yeah, I'll need to click, I'm afraid.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Murray.
Okay, thank you. I'll just see if I can get on. I think that was Olivia's last slide. Okay, good evening. So basically, what I want to say, just to repeat what Helena said, we realise that there's a lot of very, very knowledgeable people, a lot of experience in housing and house building in this room and online, etc. And we're not trying to claim the territory. Rather, to explain, we thought this came from an idea from Rosalind, and we put this together quite quickly. But the idea was to really sort of draw on the best knowledge in different areas to bring together an integrated report. So we wanted it to be very consciously interdisciplinary. So it includes public health, economics, sustainability, architecture planning, and various other inputs. We've been talking to lots of people, trying to get the best knowledge from them. We're not really trying to say anything, I don't think, that other people have not said before, so we're not claiming originality, but really what we're trying to do is just to draw these issues together, really to address what we see as the two key problems, one of which is homelessness in all its complexities and all its forms, and the second one is this lack of affordability, particularly affecting younger people in our society, and also particularly key workers who are so essential for our services. So that's really what we're trying to do in this report, to put together a kind of a state of the knowledge in the subject and come up with some realistic proposals as a result. So this is my next slide. I stress again also what Ross said, the difficulty getting hold of figures is a really major problem. There's a few causes for this. First of all, as you will know, since devolution, we have 4 nations within the United Kingdom, all of which have very, very different kind of housing policies and approaches, etc. So how you integrate them, they have different definitions of what those houses they're delivering, things like, you know, what is social rent, what is affordable housing, etc. So that's another complexity. And quite often we realise we search as much as possible for the data, but quite often not all parties disclose all information at their behalf. They keep this. We know that the government and local authorities and housing associations and private house builders and developers have a sort of their own way of calculating things, and they don't necessarily tell you all the stories. So we've had to sort of interpolate quite a lot. But we think this is roughly what we felt was a kind of both a realistic kind of proposal based on what we could find out, what we could interpolate, and what could be delivered, etc. And what we're suggesting is pretty much explained in those 2 graphs on the top left here. The first one is kind of current, and the second one is what we're proposing. And that just shows you, we're trying to collect all this information and put these figures together just so we can get an idea of, you know, what might be involved. The big black block on both sides is this idea that there will be private house building that's continuing, and it is roughly at this level. Of course, it goes up and down, but it's, you know, broadly speaking, historically, it's been at this level, and that's across the UK. And then we have for the other countries, and then above there we've got what we're calling social and affordable housing. Social rent housing residing as subsidised rent properties in perpetuities owned generally by housing associations and local authorities, which are broadly speaking 50 to 60% of sort of market rate levels, etc. Affordable housing is partly subsidised housing, probably most people say roughly about 80% of market levels, and it can be sort of shared ownership, shared buying schemes, etc. And then the other housing is market rent or market sale, which is really at the market level. And so what we're imagining is that we need approximately 72,000 more dwellings. So this is what we thought there would be a sort of realistic sort of level of achievement. You sometimes hear stories of, you know, wanting, 150,000 more houses and what have you, etc. We felt that was probably achievable there as well. They're not all social rent and affordable, which I'll explain in a bit. And the other thing to point out really is that if you look at where the kind of the expansion is needed, England is well behind proportionally the other 3 nations within the UK as well. So that's where they need have a sort of an injection. The tenure mix we're suggesting should be a combination, and this is coming from a lot of best practices of people we're talking to in housing associations and local authorities. And so there will be, we're proposing roughly 50% of these dwellings should be social rent, so they're for the people on the lowest incomes and who want stable rented properties. Roughly 20% should be of the affordable category, so they're kind of schemes whereby younger people or people can start to get on the property market, so they can get in that way. And then the other 30% is essentially market rent, market sale houses, which effectively the sale of those or the money from those cross-subsidises the subsidy on the rest of them as well. And this is a model that is being used, and we talk to people who are using this as well. But we also see this as desirable in terms of social mixing. You know, this idea, one of the criticisms of council housing estates and other things in the past was that they were, for one class only, they were very divisive. I grew up in Scotland. When I was growing up in Scotland, I lived in a council house. 50% of people in Scotland live in council houses. It was just lots of people live there as well. So, and it generally works better if they're not seen as just for one class only. So that was really what we're trying to do in this. We're trying to imagine what a realistic thing, and as I say, we talked to some really, really brilliant sort of housing people who are coming up with these ideas. So these are not our original ideas. We thought we'd come up with 12 proposals. We know we always try to report this, need recommendations at the end, and you 2 or 3 sound you too little, and then it starts to grow and grow. You might well disagree with these. I'll read them out because you know, they're there for a thing. And what we want to do is come up with a reasonable integrated. We want them to be integrated to cover many different things. Realizing we haven't covered everything. We know this as well, but we thought this was a realistic kind of strategy that could be taken up. So first of all, there's this idea that a broader and longer term economic vision is needed. I can't read all the way over there, so after this, it's needed for housing as well, and that really comes from the input from Rosalind, Helena, Kerry, Berthani and others as well. The health benefits and the health NHS savings must be factored in. And again, this idea that we don't normally talk about this when we talk about housing. We talk about costs of housing as units. We don't think of them as really as a piece of what Pete Barber calls as social infrastructure. They're part of our society. They're like our roads, like our basic kind of requirements of society. We should be thinking in those wider terms. We tend to sort of push it off as an issue by itself. The third point, we need a differential housing policy, partly because of devolution and also because of the great escalation and difference in land values across the UK as well. We can't have a one solution fits all type thing. We need to have a range of strategies that different countries and different agents in those countries can take from. We're saying right to buy should end in England for all further housing. It's already been abolished in Scotland and Wales, and they're doing very well. Northern Ireland is very severely restricted. It's an anomaly that's in England, and we think that possibly this idea of affordable housing that allows people to come on the market is a logical replacement for right to buy. At the moment, it's stopping too many councils from acting. We think there should be tenure-blind social mixing, and no difference in the dwellings, and we've got some good examples of that. You don't differentiate architecturally. We think there should be fixed requirements. We're suggesting we use the London Plan, which we think, or certainly the document is produced by the GLA and the London Mayor have very good space standards. We think they should be our sort of new standard for everybody, so you can't get small dwellings. We're suggesting passive house standards to be adopted, and that's really to reduce operational carbon. We have to get the carbon down there, and we've got good examples of that being done. I won't go into any details here. We need people who will be able to build there, so we need a kind of green skills training. Again, there's lots of people arguing for this as well, but this needs to be tied in. We need people who are going to build and people who are going to assess and monitor the houses. We need, and the last one is more about delivery. We need local authorities, I think, to build on a large scale again. It's the one missing link. It was the piece that's been sort of removed from the housing picture, and I think we're seeing the cumulative effect of that today. And so we think we should allow local authorities to take part along with housing associations, private builders and the others as well, but they should be given more thing. They should have greater flexibility over their finances, and I obviously don't go into there, but they've been severely restricted in how they can fund that, etc. We want to really push for retrofit. The idea of retrofit, we've suggested at least half. It would help with the idea of getting land and also help us to do with empty housing. It will help us to try to minimise the amount of new built carbon we do. So we think we should be really put a huge emphasis on retrofit. And then also 12, the special measures are needed for rural areas. If there's a real kind of difficulty, I think, in providing new sort of affordable housing is rural areas that, for various reasons, I won't go into now, are the trickiest. We've got some very good experts at University College London London who know all about the problems of rural housing. And so this is just to show you, I can show many other schemes. Please do not be at all offended if your scheme is not here. There's lots of superb housing being done, but these were just some that we came across and people we talked to in our report. And really what we want to do is we want to point to those and saying it can be done because it's being done. You know, we're actually building this kind of housing, and we think there's some really fantastic kind of exemplars being done. We want to stress over there, if we look at Miguel Ritchie's, who won the Stirling Prize a few years ago, at the top left, the retrofit of Park Hill, so we should be looking for high standard passive house retrofit, and that's one of their new schemes in New York. Our GMP doing housing in Hemel Hempstead. I grew up in Hemel Hempstead as well, so I know how difficult it is to do anything there. NIHR Architects, we're lucky we have Alex Ely here, the architect for this scheme. This is the regeneration of the Agar Grove estate in Camden to passive house standards, a really exemplary project. And there's Peter Barber, who is probably one of the best known people who's doing a lot of very innovative housing projects in there as well. So we think they can be done. These are sort of, you know, trying to meet really high both sort of standards in terms of sustainability, in terms of, sort of reducing carbon uses, etc. These are architects that were Stirling Prize winners or Stirling Prize contenders, so these are some of the very best architects around, and there's lots of other ones too as well. And so I just want to say is what we need now is the political will and the financial help to scale these kind of examples up into major social and affordable housing programme, and we want this to help those in housing need, but as Rosalind said, sorry, also in society more generally, and we think this will give help to save on homelessness costs, as we've heard from Eleanor and Bethany, and then this will also give us better health and life opportunities for those who are suffering now, and I would say especially for children in homeless accommodation. I don't know if you mentioned the figure, but the estimate there's 120,000 children homeless in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murray. That was terrific. And John, you're the father of this gathering. Right. Go on.
Right. Well, I had a script, but I'm not going to bother with that because I'm just going to try it. Now, this, Helena, you might, oh, you've got it, you can see it there. I mean, the reason I got interested in this whole social housing and affordable housing issue was as a kid, brought up in Dunoon, where Lord Robertson was, as an eminent student and former pupil, unlike myself. And I used to take a bike home or take a kid who lived in one of the prefabs in back of the town, which had been there for about 25 years, and were meant to have lasted 10 years. And he gave me protection, which was very helpful at that time from the school. And I hadn't really seen a prefab since, until I saw this photograph, which really moved me hugely and began my interest in this. And because this is a well-known photograph, slightly pixelated, I guess, which is of somebody called Gunnar Hector Murdoch. And it's a photograph of him returning to his new home in Tulse Hill, and his wife, Rosanna, and his son, John, after having spent 3.5 years in a prisoner of war camp. His home had been destroyed, and he moved into a prefab. And when I sort of dug down, I thought, well, this is amazing. 1 million homes were built in Britain between 1945 and 1951. About 150,000 of those were prefabs. And you think, well, how did that happen? You know, it was because of leadership, it was of government, it was the will, and there were the use of technologies. And I thought, well, why can't that happen now? What makes this so difficult when the need is so great? And if you think that 80% of all those homes were social council homes, you think, well, what's happened? Why isn't it possible? And without making a political point, it's just a complete lack of leadership and will, and a failure to engage the making community in this country, the wonderful architects and specialists and academics and people who care about people having a roof over their head. We're just not engaged. We're not involved in the conversation. And promises are made, and every year they fail. We had 300,000 homes before Christmas were reneged because why? Why is that? A complete failure of leadership, a complete failure of a will to do something, and a failure to engage all of the skill that is available at our fingertips and to be mobilized. And actually, I think it is. I think a national plan is needed to rehouse the hundreds of thousands of people who live in substandard accommodation, homeless accommodation, the 2 million nights a year that are spent on the streets by people in Britain. I mean, it is shameful that we have the least affordable housing probably in Europe, one of the highest costs in the world, and we have the highest level of homelessness. I mean, it's shocking. And I think that simplistic view, or rather that striking image to me, is the thing that really got me really kind of angry about it, and realizing that you know, I wanted to be part of something that tried to make a difference. And as our experts have said, and Murray last, you know, we've got all of the skills here to be mobilized. We've got the experts like Rosalind, and who have made it abundantly clear of the health issues and the lack of simple economics that says, for simple economics reasons, give people fucking proper homes in order that they can contribute to the growth economy. And Olivia's compelling case studies from Dolphin Living also just makes it so clear. Next. And then, again, as a sort of, oh, I've got it, I'm so sorry. I thought Murray had it, there we go. And therefore, this simple idea that, I guess I'm sort of, something that I've come up with it, but it seems so obvious, is based in a way of the promise that was made in that photograph by Gunnar Murdoch, and then going forward to the Festival of Britain in 1961, you know, 1,500 towns and cities across Britain, you know, were mobilized to be part of the transformation after you know, years of austerity. And when you think of what happened through the Festival of Britain, it is time for another transformational act, I think. And so the idea, in very simple terms, that is in 2026, which is the 75th anniversary of the Festival of Britain, there will be another series of festivals. This time, it's going to be a festival of the home, it's not like an ideal homes exhibition, marvellous as they are. This is about affordable homes. It's about engaging climate issues. It's about retrofit. It's about sustainability. It's about skills training. It's about marshalling all of those skills we have and providing a forum for people to come and ask simple questions about, you know, land, about funding, about all of those issues that are kind of seem to be impossible to break, and also to rely on the people of this country, not government, to come forward with a mandate of what needs to happen, because my goodness, government has failed us. It has to come to what we might call citizens groups to come together and to tell government what is needed. And I thought, well, no better way than for brownfield sites and areas across Britain which are derelict or underused to be brought forward through a series of site-specific, as it was in the Festival of Britain, opportunities through a festival of housing, effectively an expo 75 years after the Festival of Britain. And we seem to have got some great interest in this, Helena, from a number of people, and we have lined up, and I'm not going to say who it is, but the best person in this country to organise the delivery of a project like this, who, as you can imagine, today is livid about HS2, but he's such an expert. He's the person who is committed to taking this idea forward with us. Everybody is welcome to contribute. It's 2.5 years away, but I think that's something to aim for. It's a single event which I think can be transformational and will be owned by the people, not by government. Thank you.
Before you move on, there's lots of people in this room, but they were all probably unborn or running around in short socks when the Festival of Britain took place. What happened at the Festival of Britain? What was it that was going on? What was this celebratory thing, and what was the vision of a changed Britain that was being put on offer?
Well, I think it...
we can hear you.
Well, I think I think what is brilliant about the Festival of Britain is that it, for reasons that I may repeat, is that it it wasn't a single event. It was an event over 6 months spread across the country. That it was sort of site-specific in many regards. So specific issues were the core theme of the future of Britain through the festival was adjusted to suit the specific needs locally. So it was a local, in a way, a local response to need. It brought forward some of the greatest designers in the country. It was mostly temporary, but some of the buildings on the sites were permanent. It was both futuristic and temporary, but permanent. It looked at future homes. It looked at technologies. It looked at everything. If you peel away the subject matter within the Festival of Britain, a great majority of those apply now. And you know, it's the last time I feel that Britain has come together to represent itself so positively in a transformational way. And I think that's why at this moment we need something similar. The time is right to come forward with something which has the potential of an equivalent level of change and legacy, which is what, you know, change for good, which is what the Festival of Britain delivered. It was its legacy and change for good. Well, that's what we need here.
It's a really exciting idea, I think, but I'd be interested to hear from the audience about the kind of levers that would need to be pulled, the kind of blocks that there are going to be on such a vision as the one that the panel have provided and the ones that you all know about. So who would like to come in first to talk about how feasible and how exciting such a prospect might be? Sir, you have to tell everybody who you are, you have to, and where you're from, and give us a little bit about yourself first.
I will. I'm John Living. I'm the Deputy Chair of Sovereign Network, which is a large UK housing association. Like everybody in the room, I'm sure, I absolutely applaud the ambition of this, but I would, because I've been working in the affordable housing space for, you know, for a very long time. I think John has touched on the key point, which is that we have to have a government that is actually engaged and interested in this topic. And today at the Conservative Party conference, the Prime Minister made no mention whatsoever of housing, notwithstanding the fact that he was allegedly talking about infrastructure and long-term decision-making. So we have to find a way to persuade this government or the next that housing is a priority, and that housing doesn't mean home ownership. Housing, you know, housing of all tenures is important. And I'd just like to say one specific thing which I think your report needs to tackle, which is this issue about social rent versus affordable rent. And delivering 100,000 affordable housing is fantastic. Delivering 50% of those as social rent is great, but we have had a massive problem with tackling the challenge of adjusting people's rents over time as their ability to pay changes. And the housing association sector has been at fault in this. We don't want to make being given a social rented house like winning the lottery, and meaning that you've then got a home for life, even if, you know, your ability to pay changes. We need to have much greater flexibility. And you said we need to give local authorities more flexibility. We need to persuade the regulator that we need to have a lot more flexibility around how we, you know, how we manage that rent charging process. But thank you for once again bringing forward an ambitious paper on this. Let's keep banging at the door of government on it.
Who else would like to come in? There's a hand, lady who's beside John. Can you introduce yourself and fire away?
I'm Barbara Brownlee. I'm the Chief Executive of Soho Housing Association. I've worked in housing for about 40 years, massively in the public sector, in local authorities, a little bit in the private sector. My first ever job in a housing association now. Probably 3/4 of that in London. I've covered housing management of council stock, homelessness, street homelessness, and hugely regeneration and development. I led on Grenfell, on rehousing people, and I think the argument you make is fabulous, it's correct. Health and housing, public health and reduction of costs if people have good housing is known. It's known in every profession. It isn't known or accepted politically. And it's a really brilliant argument. I should have started by saying I love the panel. I mean, the panel's been the most fabulous mix of everything. The case studies from Olivia, you know, that is amazing affordable housing in the centre of London. To bring back to our attention the join up between health and housing, which when I worked in Hackney in the early 90s, we did reports on if you knocked down an estate and rebuilt it, people went to their doctors less. You know, it has been known for an awful long time, but nothing ever happens. And I think the panel's a joy, and it almost, you know, I could come in cynical and I think 40 years worth of work, and it's almost like the homeless are always with us. And I don't know how you shift it, and I actually don't think, even though I've worked in housing for 40 years, it's necessarily a housing problem. In the north of this country, council houses are dearer than private rented houses. In the north of this country, council houses get knocked down. The problem is a southeastern problem. It's not an England problem. And I just think we have to be realistic about that. People want to live and work in London. They don't want to live and work in the whole of England. You could move to a load of places in England now and get an affordable home. What you can't do is live in the southeast of England and get an affordable home. And that needs us to address this issue in more ways than one. And maybe high-speed rail was one of them. And maybe a spread of jobs is another one. But there is more than just building houses. And I don't think it's the same across the country.
Yep.
Okay, so there are a number of things that have come up there. How do you do this business about, if it's social housing, deciding that your circumstances have changed without being a very interventionist state that is inquiring into the earnings and so on? I mean, that can become a rather sort of oppressive and unpleasant business. Then there's the whole business of, is it really the southeast? Aren't these problems replicated in other cities up and down the country? I'd be interested to hear what people have to say about this. Is it all about London and its outer reaches? Somebody over here had their hand up. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mando Watson. I'm a paediatrician. I work in North London. I see firsthand a lot of the problems that you are alluding to today. I think what you're doing is absolutely fantastic. And it's quite exciting to be in the room. Helena, one of your questions was how do we create leverage? I would argue that if you put a young person on the podium, you will create quite a lot of leverage. So there's a little sort of suggestion. I have a sort of problem, though, listening to you, and a sort of question, if you like, for the panel. I'm thinking about the families that I see where they're frightened for their children to go outside to play. They've lost the ability to, they don't know how to play outside anymore. I think about the young people I've seen who've been raped in a dangerous stairway. You know, there's something not just about having a home, but having a home that's safe, that's of decent quality, and that has come through in your report and in your discussions today. But I'm left wondering, what's more important? Is it the quality of the space, or is it the number of spaces? And it would be interesting to know what people think.
Isn't it inevitably going to be a combination of both of those things? A hand over there, please.
Well, while it's going over there, can I just say that we're recording everything, and we're going to... It's incredibly important that you do all say your name and organisation, because we're sucking everything up, all of the points that you're making, because this is just the start of the process. So we're very, very happy to receive all of your suggestions and observations.
Hi everyone, I'm James Riding from Inside Housing. I'm afraid I don't have any wisdom to add, but I have another question, which is we've heard a lot about the need to change the political conversation around social and affordable housing. Assuming that changes, which is a big assumption, and the government says, right, we're putting the money in £5 billion a year or however much we need to build this number of social and affordable homes, do the councils and the housing associations currently have the capacity to actually build that number of homes?
Well, there's some nodding down here in the second row, that sounds positive. I mean, one of the issues, though, is that I care about a lot in all of this is the business of skills training. I do think that there is an issue about skills training in this country, and we've neglected it for a very long time. And I've spent quite a bit of my time working with people in the further education world and in the apprenticeship world, and you know, I do think that we're pretty poor on all of that, and so we've got to try and build up the skills that are necessary for the rebuilding. There's a hand up there, please.
Adrian?
Thank you very much. I'm Anna Pagani from UCL, researcher on social housing, health, regeneration and sustainability from a systems perspective. To comment, first of all, thank you for your presentation. There is really the need to see the interconnections between economics, health and all the impacts that providing more social housing would have. I just wanted to comment on a few things. We're talking a lot about building new housing. We know there has been a recent paper published that was actually showing that we have nearly no carbon budget for that, which will be a big challenge. At the same time, I've been hearing about how regeneration by demolition and rebuilding could be healthy. Actually, research is showing that the process of demolition is extremely unhealthy for residents. But of course, retrofitting and living in healthy homes would also imply not having all the empty houses that we have currently, because in buildings that are marked for regeneration and they are currently empty around London. And so perhaps there is also a need to think in that direction, and seeing also those numbers. What if actually social housing, instead of going up and taking that new build, was actually going down and taking the existing building? And yeah, in that direction, perhaps remaining under the carbon budget and not needing a kind of an interventionist state, thinking more that we could go in the direction of Vienna, for instance, where 70% of the population lives in social housing without the need for social mixing. Because as long as you have different socioeconomic backgrounds, because you have a lot of social housing, there is no need to produce social mixing by diversifying social housing from other economic housing models. Just a small provocation. Thank you.
It's always interested me that issue about Austria, about Vienna having that incredibly high percentage of the population that live in social housing. I mean, it sort of replicates Scotland. It's how it was for us when we grew up in Glasgow.
Vienna's a special case. We have experts on Vienna here. If you want to hear all about Viennese housing, we can tell you about it as well. It's an amazing story. But we've actually said in this, we would try to refrain from making those comparisons, because they're endless, aren't they, really? Yeah. So we want to talk about UK.
Okay. Yes, use your hand up.
My name's Antonia Cohen, and I work with child refugees who tend to become care leavers. And I think all the things that you've said in your report are really interesting and laudable, especially in relation to standards of housing. But when you see care leavers who are being given tents to live in, do you think there's an argument for some sort of compromise housing in the meantime? I mean, I just always remember one young Afghan 18-year-old saying, well, why can't I live in a caravan? Which would have been a far better solution, he felt, and probably would have been for him.
Thank you. Yes, hand there, please. I'd like to be able to decide where the microphone goes. There's a hand up over here. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Eleanor Story. I work at a local authority in North Essex, and the biggest barrier is money to us producing more social housing. That's really boring, but that's a fact. If we could have more money, there would be more buy-in. And also just, I'd like to reference the point about placemaking here, that actually I think once you get to the point of, if you're looking at passive house standard building, then as a general rule, the people who are involved will be a lot more cognizant of the placemaking and the full implications of that, not just the kind of fuel poverty, but also the active travel side of things, just making healthier places for people. So I would say that certainly where I work, there is a genuine interest within a small part of the workforce in the authority who are, I'd say, at the younger end of the authority, who are interested in delivering passive house standard social housing. So that is being done. I think the thing that this group could potentially do, the levers, would be to push for VAT exemptions, certainly on retrofit. That would be a massive help.
It's in the report, don't we?
I think that also there's enough intelligence and will in the room from architects and planners and other people who want to do this, that actually we can start delivering this, but we do need some financial incentives. The VAT is a really, really big one. And just as a side point, Essex are currently have drafted net zero policies, which are really, really interesting and going to be rolled out across all the authorities that I work in. And that's something that's certainly worth looking at. It's got technical evidence, it's got legal backup. So I know there is the whole embodied carbon and there is retrofitting and there is that, but for new development, it's a really interesting thing for people to take a look at.
Nobody yet has mentioned the business of planning and not in my backyard issues. A hand there, and I'll bring some of these issues back to the panel. There's two of you there, 1, 2, right?
Oliver Bullied from London Community Land Trust. I guess 2 observations. The first one is, I guess we need to turn NIMBYs into YIMBYs. So by that I mean that you want people to be supportive of development. Generally that's about having high quality development that's supported by a community. There's a recent report by the National Community Land Trust Network that suggests up to 278,000 homes could be developed by community land trusts. So that's similar to the number of homes being provided by housing associations. So it's not necessarily about community-led development, but I think it's about having community support for development. And that really needs to be high-quality development in the right places, supported by the local community, and having homes that are available for the local community. I think that's the first one, and often homes aren't there at market sale and unavailable. The second point, this is a general question that I'd like to wonder if anyone's got any feedback on that, is we have an independent Bank of England, and I wonder if we need to have an independent housing commission that oversees, in some capacity, the provision of housing around England in particular, but perhaps in the UK as well, because it's very much a political issue in terms of housing, and we don't seem to have politicians who can join the dots and set long-term ambitions in terms of both delivery, but also funding mechanisms to support housing as well.
If you can pass the right one there, please.
Hello. Hi, my name's Paul Clark. I'm a co-founder of Stories. We're a socially minded property development company. I'm also a one-time student at the Bartlett, so it's lovely to see you all here, and also a friend of Dolphin. I'm really delighted to see this agenda. It's something we've been thinking about for a long time. For my sins, I spent 9 months once, about 7 years ago, seconded into what was then DCLG, reporting to Michael Heseltine on housing estate regeneration strategies, and I actually had the joy of travelling the country in what I describe as Michael Heseltine's caravan, looking at the different challenges of housing around the country and actually experiencing the differences between the southeast problem and the northern problem. And over the years, I actually worked with Big Society Capital to try and work out what happens, how would housing look differently if you treated it as a social impact bond? How would you reward housing development if outcomes mattered? And ironically, you do end up making the case for central government grant. And in the last 6-7 years, you know the colour of the government we've had, so that's just not going to happen. What I would say is my travels and my endeavours have shown me 3 things. One is we need a national plan. We are terrible at planning in this country. We have no regional plans, we have no national plan. We need national planning, national infrastructure planning. We need to see housing as infrastructure, which I think is your point. And, you know, when we build roads and when we don't build high-speed too, we run cost-benefit analysis. We should be running cost-benefit analysis for housing, absolutely front and centre. So if the outcome of your work can be, let's treat housing as infrastructure and fund it like infrastructure, I think we'll get a long way through breaking those barriers politically to making the case for central government funding for housing.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely right.
A hand there, and I'm going to bring it back and let the panel now respond to some of the issues that have been raised, and I'll remind them what they are. There's a question online, and I'll get Lucy to tell me what it is. Last one here.
Hello, Athanasios Papas, structural engineer. Apologies, I have zero experience with social housing. However, you asked about a lever, and I cannot imagine any bigger lever than the actual society asking for it and during an election. However, what does the society want? From my reading of the British society, I just moved here 7 years ago, so I see things a bit as an external. And I see that, and although the ownership is one of the lowest in Europe, it is still north of 60%. And as I see the news every time that there is a drop in house prices, it is regarded as bad news. So I think that we have now at least 60% of the society being against the other 40. So the first question is, are the ones who already have a house against the ones who do not have? And of course, the lower end is the ones in need in social housing. And I can see the housing being regarded as a growth investment, not just a project or a value investment, but definitely not as an infrastructure. So how can we convince the society to push for?
How do we make that shift to talk about it as infrastructure rather than as a personal gain? Now, I'm going to bring in, Lucy was going to read me some questions that have come online. Can somebody do that, please?
Hello, yes. So, got John Norden from Igloo Regeneration, who's currently working with Sunderland City Council on a housing expo in 2025, who would love to help and share what is being done here with the report. His comment is that local difference point is an interesting one here, and there are housing issues in the northeast that are different to London, and yet affordability of a decent home is an issue there too. And I'll also bring in a comment from Joe McCafferty, architect and director of Levitt Bernstein, working in housing for 25 years. Thoroughly supports the recommendations in the report, and many of these are already being pursued in London and other cities across the UK. But with Brexit, escalating build costs, new regulations for fire escape in housing, and minimised state funding, this has absolutely demolished delivery of social housing, with blockages, lacking state funding, channeling to local authorities and housing associations to deliver social rented homes and resource support for local authorities to do so. She's also commented that rethinking contributions is a proper social contract with local communities affected by development, and they need to ring-fence money to support health, education, open space and public transport will instantly unlock local support for development in neighbourhoods. So just a couple of comments there from online.
And really good comments they are too, and also raising that thing that there are these problems in other parts of the country as well, especially for the young, not being able to afford housing, not being able to find housing, that whole set of issues. And let me tell you, it also drives the hostility to immigration and so forth because of the shortage of housing, so it doesn't bring out the best in us. So, John, I'm going to bring this back to the panel. Very interesting contributions here from people across a very interesting, range of backgrounds. People in housing, people in health, people who have got expertise in the whole business of provision of housing. How easy would it be to get this to be seen as infrastructure?
Well,
I mean, home ownership has been sold to everybody as being the ultimate test of whether you're, you know, a viable human being in our current society.
I'm very...
Sorry, just on the home ownership and the question, we looked at the statistics, and if I read the statistics right, Britain and UK is the same level of home ownership as France and Sweden. Yeah. We're above Germany. There's one or two countries. I think we get slightly obsessed with this idea, and everybody assumes, you know, there's this, you know, there is a large amount of people who are not homeowners and don't want to. So I just think we should be careful about that. Sorry, yes.
It's your phone.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer it?
No.
No, I'm joking. This question...
I thought it might be somebody offering us
the question of infrastructure.
An infrastructure strategy.
I mean, I may let the gentleman ask the question. I mean, I am infrastructure sort of, you can ask my family, almost defines everything I do. Everything is really, to me, almost comes back to infrastructure. And when you look at housing, whether it's retrofit, the question that was asked earlier, of course retrofit and using what exists rather than demolishing and rebuilding is absolutely the name of the game and has to lead the drive forward. But I mean, we're essentially a transport architect, and what excites me most about infrastructure is if you can unlock the elements of infrastructure. It's a sort of surgical exercise. The progress you can make is phenomenal, and I think from a housing perspective, looking at it as infrastructure, maybe this isn't the way that the chap who asked the question was perceiving it. I think you unlock, in terms of the physical infrastructure as well as the social infrastructure, if you can combine those two, you have a sort of magical combination. Because if you think of put aside the social infrastructure needs, which we've been talking you know, whether it's mental health or employment or safe places to live, all of those absolutely critical issues, you can then link them back, health, to the housing infrastructure, how houses are made, how services are introduced, how building houses that are safe, how homes can be adjusted. And so the infrastructure, dealing with housing as infrastructure, for instance, we produce an awful lot of infrastructural master plans, which are the underpin almost everything. Unless you get the infrastructure right in a development, there is nothing to do. You don't start with a gated community and the glossy photo. You start with infrastructure. And HS2 springs to mind again, when, you know, infrastructure, it was such a critical opportunity that's now, to miss the future, it's extraordinary to miss that opportunity and to dissipate, presumably, some of the 32 billion elsewhere for political gain. So infrastructure, if we can think of housing in the scale that needs the endeavour here as infrastructure, I do think that is the way to consider the need, because it is both physical infrastructure and it's the social infrastructure that aligns with it. And to get those two aligned is where the product of housing is its most successful. So
I'm going to bring the rest of you in, but I just want to throw into this. You know, we can't have this discussion without putting it in the context of our own situation at the moment, which is that there's going to be an election next year, and it will either be in May or in October. The parties are sort of on you know, all of them will lay out their wares, but we know that the availability of serious money to do creative things is going to be in short supply. And we know that there's going to be a deal of caution, whoever's in government. It looks like an opportunity for real change. There could be a different government. Is there an opportunity for raising these issues with people who might come in with a different set of priorities, even if there's a lot of similarity on the economic front? What are your thoughts on that, Murray?
Well, I think there should be as well. I mean, I think what we're saying is that if a political party, and it could be any political party, of course, that wants to look at this thing and realises, you know, that actually we're saying you're not spending any more money on this. You know, if you actually look at this in this balanced way, you can actually achieve this without
having to come up with powers more cash. We also want them to think about this idea of sustainability. I mean, the idea of reducing operational carbon, of all these kind of things are vitally important, you know. So what we can't quite understand is why somebody would not see this. I think this would be a very popular policy with people, particularly with young people. I think a lot of young people in this country are really, really desperate about what their future is in terms of housing. So you think this could be a really popular policy. We're saying it shouldn't cost you any more money. It will have these health benefits. It will do this as well. And so what we need is somebody to sort of take this,
when you say it wouldn't cost you any more money, it will in the first instance.
Well, no, because we're suggesting, I mean, this I think goes to James's point, by the way, but I'm glad that James is here. If anybody wants to hear a debunking of the current government statistics, you should listen to More or Less. James was on More or Less, the Radio 4 programme recently, did a brilliant piece on this as well, so we don't need to say any more. Your idea was about capacity. I think you build capacity up. Capacity grows. It doesn't just come with a switch as well. So I think there needs to be a structured transformation, and that this is possible, and this is the way it's going to happen. So what we were saying very clearly in the report, we don't think this is going to happen next year. This is going to gradually move over to that. And I think there's a real appetite amongst, from certainly the people we spoke to in housing associations and local authorities, there's a real appetite for this. There needs to be structured help, but we think it is possible.
But it has to be, I mean, a call has to go out saying housing has to be on in manifestos and on the agenda of any political party that you know, worth its salt, that's going to come in after an election. Now, we just heard that here we are. I haven't heard the Prime Minister's speech at his own party's conference today, but from what I'm hearing, in this business of you know, he's describing himself as a person who's willing to make difficult decisions because he's looking at the long term and he's a long future and so on, and yet housing and dealing with this issue, one of the most fundamental of issues, one would have thought, wasn't on his register at all, because he knows that by and large, to the constituencies that he is there speaking to,
right, I mean,
there's not a lot of enthusiasm for building in green leafy lanes.
I mean, if you want to be cynical, the constituents which government is interested in aren't those who are homeless. It doesn't really, I mean, if you really wanted to be, I mean, why is there so little attention paid? Why is there being a housing minister, it's sort of down there with the DCMS minister? Why is it relegated to the bottom of the pile? And it, you know, if you're cynical, you say it's because, you know, it's not the thing that most constituents are particularly interested in. So they're not going to, you know, why spend whatever it's going to build into you when you can do something else which is going to get votes? It's simple as, I think it's as simple as that, and it's cynical, politically cynical, not to turn one's attention to addressing once and for all, and seriously, the crisis in social and affordable housing. But it's not a vote winner. Sadly, I don't think. Or it's not seen as a vote winner because of the way it's presented.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Well, it shouldn't be. But why isn't it up there then, for goodness sake?
First of all, as everyone says, money talks, and the return on investment for this form of infrastructure is more rapid than for other forms of infrastructure. First point. Second point is that the government itself has found that the greatest value for money, if I say any of this wrong, Varthony and Eleanor, then you say so, the greatest value for money is in social rent housing. So the money talks bit is important. Then there's the thing about what are the constituents. You've mentioned young people. Let's mention old people. There are lots of old people in substandard cold housing. People didn't seem to realise it before COVID, but people were dying of both heat and cold. Old people were. They always do, every winter, every summer, there's a heat wave, every winter cold. So we can go, if you want the constituents to be, if the party is focusing on old people, we can focus on that. And what about key workers? I have to hand over to Olivia now, but the proportion of people who are key workers who cannot afford to live where they live. Now, voters care about key workers. They care about having people in the NHS, people who are care staff, people who are ambulance staff, people who are police officers. They want them to live sort of near them so that there are people who have got the jobs, so that there aren't so that we're not spending quite as much as we are on agency staff, for example, because we don't have anyone near us who can afford to live there. So I want to sort of hand over
Rosalind,
to Olivia
so
about
why
key
doesn't
workers.
housing feature in the manifestos?
So this is what we've got a couple of peers here and here that might say that, but that's the point. We have to find the way of, we have to latch onto what is the thing that each political party wants to hear, and we'll be able to find the narrative for it. That is
the other thing, John, I would say, is that there are an awful lot of young people who, unlike their parents, are not going to be able to afford to get on the housing ladder at all. I mean, I work with lots of young people who have qualified and they just don't earn enough money and they can't save enough to have a deposit, and unless you have well-off a family who have got disposable income that they can put in your direction, they can't get on the housing ladder. There isn't affordable housing in London if you want to be somebody who, and this is true. Well, we'll talk about that. Not enough of it. But I mean, very hard for even for young nurses and doctors and people working, police officers, they can't find things easily, and they'd like to get onto the housing ladder. So I think that families know this stuff. So I think that there are plenty of people who would be interested in a visionary housing proposal. And the other thing is that I can say from my personal experience is that people come out of prison. I mean, you're talking about, a friend over there was talking about children in care coming, they reach 18 and so on, and they're given a tent. People are coming out of prison and they're being given tents. You know, if you get a sentence, I mean, it only has to be a couple of years, you lose your place that you've been living in. And so you have to start all over again. And getting started is very difficult. It's really, I think it's really problematic, a lot of these areas that then lead to terrible on-the-street homelessness.
I'm incredibly confident that if we can mobilise people, particularly young people, we can create momentum for change. I really do, but I think it has to be led from out with government, and you know, in a way, get to a point where we shame government into doing something, and we show how how possible it is. I don't want to go bang on about the expo, but we built an expo in Haiti when you couldn't even get a ladder, and we were told that it was impossible to do, and we organised it, and we had 2011, just 10 months after the earthquake, we had a housing expo, which the British government actually was incredibly supportive of, from the embassy in Santo Domingo and Haiti and Port-au-Prince, and we raised funds and we built it, and it was 75 homes, and there were then government workers occupied. There was passive house systems, all sorts of things, and I thought, well, if we can do something in Haiti, which is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, then my God, we can do it here. And I think if we set the pace, I think government will follow. And the point about money, I mean, I remember we had a client, Torquil Norman, wonderful guy we built the Roundhouse for, who said, funding, money always follows a good idea. And I think that's what I hope this is the beginning of, the coalition, as we call it, that if we can gather momentum and we can engage this audience, and if we can mobilise others, I think we can create that momentum, which is the point of this evening, I believe. Is it not, Murray?
Yeah,
Olivia.
I'm sorry,
Olivia.
Politically, it doesn't feature in the manifestos because it's too difficult. And one of the reasons it's too difficult for the political parties is they're wedded to two things that are opposing, so home ownership and social housing. And actually that doesn't meet the needs of a lot of the population. So what you were saying about people like us, our children aren't going to be able to afford housing unless we can afford to give them a lot of money. You know, that is presumably something that would gain a lot of political support. And actually, if we're building, you know, it's about building more homes, and you need the social housing, absolutely, but it needs to provide for everybody. And at the moment, we have a polarity which doesn't appeal to enough people, so it's put in the too difficult box.
I mean, one of the things that I was excited by, John, and when I met with with you to talk about this, was the idea that you're almost creating a deadline if you say the 75th anniversary of the sort of great sort of expo that there was in 1961. That you create an anniversary thing, and that there's going to be, and that you make it about, and your title is about, not about housing, but about having a home.
Correct.
that everyone should be entitled to have a home. And that is what it's about.
Yeah.
And so I think that if you have a project like that and a deadline of, not to say that the houses are going to be built by then, but that people are going to come with their projects and their wares and the ideas about it and so forth, and that you stimulate some kind of event around the fundamental right to have a home.
The idea includes music as a sort of like, it's not quite Glastonbury, but it's like a kind of Glastonbury with a, I hate to say a purpose, I don't mean that at all, a different purpose. And the idea that, you know, you reverse schedule it, as you call it, you have a date, a bit like we created a date here, and that, you know, we work back from that date, that you have a date and you work back to what happens, how do you get to that point? And I think that's what one of our next steps is, how do we, what, June to 2026, so as long as I don't think there's any football or rugby or whatever it might be on, that we work back from that, and then you go forward to, and from the funding point of view, I mean, if you were, bless you, if you were to abandon the Palace of Westminster refurbishment, that's the first 2 years will be funded on the programme.
Have you seen the mice that are running through the corridors of Westminster? George, have you got a thought on this, about how we get this into the political dominion?
Yeah, well, I think so. I don't know. Yeah, I'm George Robertson, and I'm a Labour peer, and I used to be the second biggest landowner in the United Kingdom, and one of the biggest owner of houses in the country, as well as Secretary of State for Defence. So that's my sort of background in that. I've got a memory of the poll tax. You know, the poll tax, on the face of it, was a wonderfully fair method of dealing with local revenue. Everyone was going to pay exactly the same thing, and that was how it was born. Then what happened was there was a revolt against the unfairness of it. And as a local MP, I had people queuing up basically to complain on behalf of their children who were being treated in exactly the same way as the very, very wealthy people who lived in the wealthiest part of my constituency. And that became a rolling programme, and the poll tax was ultimately abandoned. At the moment, you've got a real serious housing crisis for Generation Z. The new young people who are up to the eyes in debt, who've got social problems and mental problems arising out of the pandemic, and they've got parents who are becoming their own landlords because a lot of them have got to stay at home. There is no other alternative because they can't get onto the housing ladder in any way. So we need to mobilise that sentiment of unfairness in order to get an answer to the problem. Up till now, the problem has been planning. That's the excuse that is given by the politicians. Boris came in promising to sort out the planning regulations, and then found that he couldn't do it because the NIMBY problem was so deep in the blue wall seats. They abandoned it completely. Now, Keir Starmer has made it clear that they're going to reform, you know, the planning structure. So you have never got a better time to lobby for housing than you have at the present moment. We are at most 6 to 8 months away from a general election. So making it a major priority and mobilising people who feel that there is something deeply unfair about a situation with all the social problems that are involved, but also the aspirational problems of that younger generation who can't get it. So this is the moment. And the other point is, all of the parties are committed to growth. You know, we're seeing that now as the label for producing the prosperity of the future. There is no better way of driving growth in the economy than through housing.
Yeah.
So the combination of that, I think, is the way in which you can mobilise support.
I mean, I don't think you can have a discussion about this without talking about the fact that in the end, you have to get governments to move. And one way of getting them to move is getting enough people to be making a noise who see the way that this is affecting them. And there's undoubtedly, I mean, it's what Amanda was saying about the absence of a young person perhaps on this platform. But I mean, the truth is that young people are feeling very, very bruised and angry about the way in which they feel that they've got a short straw in all of this. And so I think that there is an issue of justice in this, and the unfairness of a world that is not making things possible that, for example, were so much more possible for previous generations. And so I think there is a thing there, as well as the business of young people also caring about about the impact of this on people who are been in care and who are maybe were refugees and so on. And so I think that there's a whole thing about talking to the young. I also think that a new government is going to be looking for ideas, especially ones that could iron out in a good way financially. So, I mean, your thing, Murray, on that is...
Yeah. I would agree with that entirely. It strikes me one of the reasons why there is this sort of lack of political will is that people have got a certain pessimism about it. They don't think it can be done. Oh no, there's the planning laws, or there's the land problems, or there's this, that, and the other. What we want to do, partly in this report, is saying it is being done. There's some really brilliant housing being built now. And this is kind of exemplary housing, and it can be done. So therefore, don't be so fatalistic, realise it can be done. There's ways of getting around. Some very ingenious people working out how to get land. Local authorities can access land in certain kind of ways. We're suggesting there's a lot of retrofit. We'd love to see 50% retrofit. That house, that stock doesn't need to be built. It's there, you know, so you don't need land. So there are ways of getting around this as well. And in terms of what we're saying, the young people obviously feel generation feel the housing as well. Certainly from my experience of teaching in the Bartlett, the younger generation are really, really worried about climate change and environmental change as well. And we have to really push this up the agenda. It always gets left off. And the thing that really struck me in talking to Alex, Ilya and various other people is that people are building housing now. And if you take the Michael Ritchie's schemes there, they're building dwellings now which use 20% of the electricity and input to run the house, yeah? To heat and light the house, 20%. We're talking about fuel poverty, we're talking about fuel crisis, all this kind of stuff. If you can say to people, I don't understand why the party doesn't say, if your bill was $1,000 a year for all that stuff, we'll get it down to £200. You know? I mean, if you talk about a cheap vote winner, that strikes me that is the thing to do. You should be saying this to people. We can build dwellings that doesn't have to consume so much of the Earth's resources, and you can save money as well. That I can understand, and I think there's a lack of vision, I must confess, from politicians. I think people are not seeing that these are the big picture issues, and they can actually tie into housing.
Murray, can I ask you, do you group that into infrastructure? This umbrella of infrastructure.
It could be a way of saving energy.
It's part of the infrastructure. Olivia, were you going to...
No.
Sorry.
No, Murray, brilliant.
Who else would like to come in? We're getting down to our witching hours. Please, my other colleague from the House of Lords.
Thank you very much and for being here. It's full of a room full of people who have expertise of which I have none. But I'm a human being and I know about housing, and I'm conscious that John has talked about the importance of building back from the date that he's proposing for this expo, bringing in all the factors that have been described and then working out a step at a time. And I want just for half a minute to mention a hero of mine with the same name as me, Jim Griffiths, who insisted, as the leader of the Labour Party during the war years, of having a debate on the Beveridge Report in 1943, and insisted on having the House of Commons vote on the Beveridge Report. The Conservative Party didn't want that because it would appear that we were divided in a time of war. Jim Griffiths knew that after the First World War, people came back from the war and had nothing waiting for them. And by having that debate and forcing those divisions, a preparation was made in a time of war for a period after the war when we had unprecedented levels of debt and dispiritedness to implement the findings of the Beveridge Report and have local authorities take full responsibility for shaping the new Britain that came afterwards. So that historical note. Now is the time to do the equivalent of what Jim Griffiths did with that debate during the Second World War. Now is the time to trigger and to give momentum to the things that we talk about in the abstract or out of our expertise in a rather aesthetic place like this. It's on the streets, it has to be people, we have to be mobilized, and we have to make sure that governments at all levels, in the regions, the devolved governments, as well as the national government, and at local level, understand that people want homes. And they must be left in no doubt about it at all. So that's a bit of a campaigning speech rather than the speech of an expert, because I don't know nothing about those.
Thank you.
Lord Griffiths, thank you. That was great.
Brilliant.
And a nice little bit of history, because it did mean that there was, you know, I have to tell you that I was brought up in a tenement where one of the girls in my class lived in a prefab, and we thought that was rather terrific. We thought that having a prefab was posh, let me tell you. But we did.
No, nothing wrong.
So, because you had a garden and stuff like that around it. Anyway, who else would like to come in? Hand there in the front row, great.
I hope this will connect up a few things that has been sort of stalking the conversation in a good way. A few years ago, there was this paper written by the Office Government for Science about housing. I don't know why, but they did. And it contained this lovely line, which is, the housing debate in the UK is bedeviled by rival oversimplifications. Isn't it true, right? There's all these different drums being banged, and sometimes you can't see straight for the noise. And there's so many good ideas as well as so many bad ideas and bad faith arguments and so forth. I think one of the big one of the oversimplifications, though, is we tend to get drawn into saying it's about building houses. And part of what we do is building houses, but I would say that building houses is not the problem. Right? Building even zero carbon, incredibly high-performing houses, just the knowledge and skills in this room, given the opportunity, could build you the most extraordinary houses and retrofit houses. There is extraordinary knowledge and capacity, and that's been touched upon already. The real crux of the thing, which this conversation seems to be coming to, is that the real root of the issue is, as we've touched on, land. Right? It's most of what makes a home unaffordable is not the building on top of it, it's the price of the land underneath it. Right? That's the bit that inflates. And that is at the root of it's been the root of our politics since 1066, that problem, and all the vested interests. It's a really tricky problem. It's what Winston Churchill would have called the mother of all vested interests, right? So, and it's really hard. It's like redesigning the game of Monopoly while the players are still on the board. So there's all these vested interests locked into it, arguing with each other. But in a way, my request, I love this idea of an expo, and my wish for it is that we can really focus on that challenge, which is what we're really talking about is how do we get land out of a space where it's seen as a financial asset into a space where it's seen as infrastructure for our economy, for our society, for our environment. How are we going to get it out? Is it going to be through the planning system? Is it going to be through compulsory purchase orders? Is it going to be through community land buyouts? What kind of new kinds of bond might fund that? And as you said already, there's so many interesting, bubbling up, interesting ideas. And for me, that's the bit that I think is really interesting, is ideas around, even if government doesn't move, showing new ways to get that land out. And of course, wrapped up in the land is also the other side of this, which is land is really location. And location is about infrastructure. We know that being in the catchment area of an Ofsted outstanding school adds about 50 to 80k at least to the value of a home. How much of that money does the school see? Not very much, right? So it's also about building, taking some of that overheated money out of the land and getting it into schools, transport infrastructure, parks, etc. in the north, and as you touched on, right? So this is, for me, the bit that's going to require us to take our ingenuity to the next level. And that's why I love Baroness Kennedy. I loved your thing about, let's make it about having a home, not just building houses.
Yes.
Can I just ask, sorry, I just want to ask Murray,
I mean,
the green belt issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different issues we touch on. I work with a very good, in a faculty with a very good School of Planning, who have told me I should be doing more planning in this as well. They're fantastic experts in this. And yes, you're right, we need to do something about, you know, land, particularly in the rural areas. I mean, certainly from my colleagues tell me that's a real major thing. What we want to do in this report, and then other people said to us, well, actually, you need land reform, and we probably do need land reform, but what we didn't want in this report to take on everything. We've got a much more specific target. We just wanted to show what could be done with present knowledge, etc. We realised that these bigger issues have to be tackled, but you know, other people are saying, well, you have to look at the way that public sector debt's calculated. And you know, you get these kind of really important big things, but it would just swamp us. And so we had a relatively short period of time. We thought we'd accept that those do need to be doing this, experts and that. We'd like to tie into that. But we wanted to focus on this idea that within this sort of constraints at the moment of access of land, a lot of the local authorities are fairly confident they can act. Yeah, there is a space to act, and there's things like I have a very good Peter. I don't know if Peter's here. Peter Bishop, who's a colleague, my roommate at the Bartlett, has basically written a lot about what can be done in terms of greenbelt land. In terms of, you know, there's a lot of brownfield sites, a lot of defunct sites in greenbelt which could be used, etc. There could be some more careful kind of negotiation of that as well. So I think there are, from what I can see, enough practical ways to get land, but in the longer term, you're right. Yeah, I think there needs to be a bigger change. But if we wait for that to happen, we felt that nothing would get done. And
did you give your name, by the way?
I'm sorry.
Could you?
Alistair Parker from Open Systems.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alistair.
And so, you know, so I'm very taken by. I mean, I do mention the City of York Council. We talked to the housing delivery manager there, and who's really quite ingenious, I think, as well. And so they're finding really kind of clever ways to access land, etc. I know it's not a longer-term strategy, but at least we could get things moving, I think.
Very interesting about your being the, having had a moment of being the biggest landlord in the whole of the United Kingdom. Any of that land that might be usable? Because, I mean, we constantly get complaints about the quality of what is available to those in the military, and the housing that's available there is not considered very good. So anyway, land reform. I have a vision of a debate in the House of Lords on land reform, and I can't imagine it being very successful. Anyway, I'm bringing us towards an end, unless there's any one word, because I know that we lose our online audience in right now, actually, in a minute. Yes, I'm being told that now's the moment to wind up. But I'm going to pass to you, John, because this was your gig, and you really put the energy behind it. No, and with Rosalind and Olivia and Murray, it's been a really invigorating discussion, and I hope it can be the start of something.
It will be.
It will be.
It will be. Thank you very much, and thank you, Helena, and all the.
Everybody's
the
contributions.
Murray, that you got in from the Bartlett,
yeah,
have been
very
fantastic. So thank you very much for everybody attending, and onwards.
Onwards, and as I say, if a deadline, let me just tell you, if you're talking about an expo in 2 years' time,
2.5 years.
2.5 years' time, still pretty soon, actually. You're going to have to get your skates on.
Loads of time.
Loads of time.
Isn't it?
If everybody rolls up their sleeves, we can get something going.
Oh, it's just a tent.
A big tent
with some stuff.
Okay, the O2 Centre. That was a big tent.
Pardon?
Where are we going to do it? You say outside of London?
Well, we have actually the offer of a site, a brownfield site from a developer that I can't possibly name in London, but the key is that it happens across the country.
It should travel. Yeah, it should be happening everywhere.
It happens everywhere.
It has to happen everywhere, or it's not going to work.
Absolutely.
Can I thank everyone for coming? Can I thank this great panel? Fantastic work, fantastic people. It's been great.